Serious, former priests, nuns, imams, rabbis, monks of Reddit, what is the story behind you leaving the church or faith? I was what was known as a Kurov rabbi. Essentially it's basically the Jewish form of missionaries, but we only target people who are Jewish by birth but not observant. I was supposed to get into many conversations with college kids and convince them to be religious. During my training, they kept hammering in that I should stick to the script and keep leading the conversation to predetermined responses. I didn't understand why they made such a big deal about it and decided to have free and open dialogue with students. For years this made me the most effective Kurov rabbi in my city. I even spoke at conventions about my method. However, I eventually learned why they insisted we stick to the script. Some of those kids had good points, and open conversation allowed them to express them. After a few years, they had too many arguments that I had no answers to. Dang, the script was for you. Good twist. Well, I was a Franciscan postulate, so the first stage towards becoming a friar. Besides the falling out I had with one of the provincial administrators, I realized I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I became a postulate due in large part to a very bad breakup. I thought myself unlovable, so I turned towards a life where that wouldn't be an issue. I had a deep respect for the Franciscans, especially their work with the poor, and could think of no better life than one spent helping others. Ironically, it was in my ministry with the poor that I realized two things. 1. If I could find joy in helping the helpless, I couldn't be entirely unlovable. And 2. I wanted to be a father. My own father actually studied to be a priest. He had noticed that the men who left the seminary would start complaining about insignificant things right before they did so. One morning, he woke up, said I hate the color of these walls, and immediately knew he had lost the call to priesthood. I was a Franciscan postulant too. It's very possibly that a breakup led me to religious life as well. For clarification, it is possible for Catholic religious, monks, sisters, nuns, and friars to leave their respective orders in line with canon law and in good faith with the church. Source: I was a Franciscan friar, following the spiritual way of Saint Francis of Assisi. I was a friar from September of 14 to June of this year, so I'm still readjusting to regular civilian life. Through prayer and discernment I realized that God was no longer asking me to live that kind of life. I was in a period called temporary vows, so I made my vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and they were valid for 1 year. I lived out my year of vows and I simply did not renew them for that next year, and left canonically. Feel free to ask questions. Entered the convent right out of high school, left within a year. I was just too young, barely 17, but very sincere in wanting to be a nun. Fast forward 52 years, while I haven't left the church, I can't abide the institutional misogyny, the clericalism, the emphasis on the institution rather than the gospel. I haven't abandoned my faith, but I think the Roman Catholic Church is very, very flawed and still existing in the 4th-12th centuries, rather than following Jesus as it claims to do, with many notable, individual and some congregational exceptions. I'm not a religious man by any means, but at least it seems the Pope these days seems to have a solid head on his shoulders. At least you guys have that going for you. I never actually joined a seminary, but when I was in my early mid-teens I was dead set on doing so and was as such spiritually preparing, fasting, praying, etc. Mine is a long story, but essentially I was hit with a 3-pronged spear. Real life experience outside of my church circle. First love and the opening my eyes to my own closed-mindedness eventually led to me leaving the Catholic Church. I saw that the people claiming to be different from the rest of the world were not more than human. I realized that trusting God fixed exactly 0 of my problems, that included severe mental physical illness, nor gave me any kind of peace or recompense for my suffering. Other ex-Catholics will certainly understand this. I was told that I should wait until I died to have my peace, as this life was a mere shadow of the next and that God's will be done. I became disenchanted by a number of fanatical individuals' promises that certain religious practice would make life easier, as none of them ever did. I witnessed grown adults behave like children, falling over and speaking in tongues, as well as display guileful tactlessness and cruelty towards outsiders or people of the world. During this time I also became unhealthily obsessed over a girl I was convinced would fall in love with me, while I shamelessly used my heightened spiritual senses as a justification for behaving foolishly in my attempt to make her see that I was holy. Feeling God's assurance governed everything I did, as I relied heavily on placebos and whim to dictate what I believed. It was not until my failed attempts to swoon that poor young woman failed and I fell into a deep depression that I began to realize what an idiot I had been. I stopped trusting feelings and the power of prayer. I cut out toxic people from influencing my already skewed worldview any further and educated myself on other ways of thinking. I focused on treating people better no matter who they were and got a clue about how to publicly behave. My journey was not an easy one, but, as the old adage goes, sometimes people never look up until they're flat on their back. My uncle left seminary. He wanted to go to poor areas and teach underprivileged kids, and when he got his assignment near the end, it was something like study under a higher up in the church and basically be his assistant. He left a few weeks before he would have graduated, that then immediately got drafted for Vietnam. Do Mormons count? In the LDS church, most young men are given the title of priest at the age of 16. After being a priest for 2 years, I was at an age where I needed to start thinking about going on a 2-year mission to spread the gospel. Most people I had talked to about it mentioned that they had felt nervous, but still excited to go. I only felt dread. Nothing about the ordeal appealed to me. Through this, I realized I didn't have this unshakable faith everyone my age seemed to have. I still had questions. Once I started asking my questions, I was met by this passive-aggressive hostility I had previously only heard of. Eventually, I was ostracized from my circle of friends, my family, and my church. They would say I was welcome, but rumors were spread about me frequently, and members never spoke to me except through platitudes. As time wore on, I began to see just how sad the church and its people made me. I've sought my own happiness since and have very much found it. I was with the RC Archdiocese of Boston. I was too spiritually, theologically, and especially liturgically conservative. They did everything they could to try to get me to pigeonhole my spirituality into theirs. They eventually forced me out. I got offers from 2 bishops and a religious order to check them out before I hung up my cassock for good. I felt too burned by the church to engage positively, so I left. I'm now still a devout Catholic with a large family and a successful people manager, and I will never live permanently anywhere where Sean Card O'Malley has authority, Boston or any of the suffragan dioceses. I guess. Son of a Jesuit here. My father stopped being a father for a few reasons. His father, biological not God, died, which was the reason he got into the priesthood. My grandfather worked for a well-known family who provided Al Capone with booze during Prohibition, and as an atonement for his family's sins, my father, the eldest, became a priest. Without my grandfather's influence on my father, my dad looked at it as a career versus a calling. In the end, him getting passed on for promotions got to him. I'ma need to hear more about this granddaddy of yours and the family he worked for. I was the youth group leader for my church and one of the few adult and youth Sunday school teachers left. The previous pastor had retired on mostly good terms and we were in the process of calling a new pastor. There was no one to run a youth group or most of the Sunday school classes, so I stepped up to the plate at age 17 because I realized how important it was to have programs for the youth and young adults in order to keep the church growing. I enjoyed doing it, but it was a lot of work that was all volunteer for not so much gain. There would be maybe 3 people other than myself that would show up for our youth group, which had an age range of 6th grade through college. There were maybe 2 children that would show up for children's Sunday school, which had an age range between 1st grade and high school. Adult Sunday school got a better attendance of around 10 a week, but that was mostly people who were 60 plus. Teenage me was not very good at figuring out how to guide this group religiously. Personally, I just got burnt out after 3 years. I tried and tried, but I never saw any growth, which frustrated me. I became frustrated with my church itself because the new pastor's wife and the rest of the call committee other than me pretty much formed a clique that was trying to redo the whole church infrastructure, including the church secretary position. My mother was the secretary at the time. My mom had several problems with what they were trying to do, so did I, to be honest, and tried to bring it up to the church council and was ignored. So I stood up for her when I was on the church council and was accused of being her personal slave just to promote her agenda. Honestly, she had some very good points which I agreed with and wanted to back her up on. We were both completely ignored. We both ended up resigning from our duties and left the church. Neither of us have regularly attended church since then. It's not that I lost my faith, because it's still there. It's that I felt wronged by a church that was very much a large part of my life since I was 5 years old, and I haven't really been able to find a new church where I am comfortable. My father still attends that church, so I periodically hear updates on what's going on there. Basically, the pastor's wife is still running things her way and not really taking into consideration what was already planned or what other people think. The entire church population is over 40 now, with the exception of about 3 people. Recently, they've been going to conferences to try to figure out how to attract more people to the church. The 2 biggest suggestions were to have youth programs and have consistent Sunday school programs, which was quite honestly what I was trying to do while I was there and what my mom was trying to point out was needed. This is massive censorship at play right here. I don't see any other reason why such a serious topic is being removed for 80% of the comments. I have been training to be a monk since I was little, and most people at the temple thought I would stay a monk once I ordained. I left after a month and a half, after years of training, because I didn't really want to be a monk. I just did it because that's what others wanted me to be. My grandmother was a nun. She took temporary vows and lived as one for a decade. She left because she was ready to and wanted to start a family. She eventually met my grandpa and did just that. I don't know the whole story. Maybe I can get it from my mom one day, but my mom's best friend since childhood was a nun for most of her life. She resigned due to her distaste for how the Catholic Church kept women down, giving all the leadership roles to men and treating nuns as secondary. I know she has written some books, but I have never read them. I think they are fictional but maybe pull a little from her true life. Why are so many of these comments removed? This is a hard question, so it should have responses that upset others. It's the nature of these type of questions. None of these comments should be removed. Open discussion is necessary. Unless of course people are harassing others, then they should get removed. Ex-Mormon here. All men of that church that go through everything are considered priests. Despite the many reasons I could have used to leave, what finally gave me the oh crap moment was when the local leaders of the church acted so normal about my family destroying divorce. They all literally acted like it was planned and even aided in it happening faster. This was coming from church leaders that push people into marriage as fast as possible and teach classes dedicated to getting married, yet no educational system on the consequences of marriage or divorce. It was then that it hit me that the whole church is just a pyramid scheme. You indoctrinate people with generic half-true histories and gospel, demand a percentage of their monthly take-home, demand that those same people work for you for free, have them or their children pay you to work aboard for you, and when they have learned too much or outlived their usefulness, toss them to the curb. I literally can't think of a more capitalistic religion. For any looking for a religion, just ask yourself a few questions before deciding. Does this very spiritual nor labor-intensive religion expect any of my physical hard-earned cash? Does this religion have a one-sided approach to a school of thought? Does this religion expect a large amount of my real dedicated time for a non-present deity? Are the people of power in that religion expecting to make financial decisions for me through guilt, ambiguity, or programs? Are they at all bigoted, racist, or otherwise unfriendly to others who don't think the same as them? If any of these come back as anything but a loud resounding no, just walk away. It's a pyramid scheme. It took me 20 years to find my way out. Don't make the same mistake. Yes, it's scary to face your mortality and lack of control of the world, but if you waste your youth and money to get to that same scary portrait, you will be even less prepared for it. My understanding of God evolved to knowing God as the all of everything. I could not countenance God being a man or woman, though a female God might have been nicer. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.